I just want to kick off asking you about yesterday's meeting. The market interpretation of the reworded statement was pretty dovish. Are we right to interpret that the ECB seems to be very far away, if not years away, from that first rate hike?
Well, I heard what Christine Lagarde just said, or at least was repeated in your program, and I fully agree with what she just said. We all agree we want to be supportive in this phase of the recovery. We all actually want to go to 2%. So my dissent should not be dramatized. I guess it boils down to the kind of commitment you can take over a possibly long period of time. I mean, we are maybe talking about 5-6 years if we look at market expectations before we would hike. And I didn't feel comfortable taking a commitment for such a long period because the risks in the future might become, we might be faced with trade-offs that are a bit more difficult than we've been faced in the past. I guess so far so good. I mean, to me, the most important conclusion of the retreat actually and our new strategy is what I would call a no-regret conclusion, is that we all agree that what we had been doing in the last few years was necessary and proportional. The question is whether this proportionality test that we are going to have to make in the future, whether we can remain proportional in what we do and take commitments over a long period of time, like 5-6 years in the future. We might be faced with issues of fiscal dominance, issues of financial dominance. And I just, at the end of the day, didn't feel comfortable taking a commitment for 5 or 6 years. Maybe I'm just taking forward guidance too seriously, because some of my colleagues, when I would ask them, so what we do if this or that occurs, they would say, oh, then we change forward guidance. So maybe I'm just taking forward guidance too seriously.
We all take the forward guidance very seriously, and thank you for actually confirming to us that you were one of the dissenters yesterday. I just want to pick up on something you said about the 5 to 6 years, because yesterday the President Christine Lagarde explained that the forecast horizon is something like 2 to 3 years. So where is this 5 to 6 years number coming from?
Well, I guess it comes from, basically from market expectations, but I guess also if you look at our forecast for inflation, it's it's still quite low in 23, so it would take some time on the basis of our last forecast to get any closer to 2%. So you can easily be in a situation where you have to wait 5 or 6 years before being confronted to, what we've been discussing in terms of forward guidance. Now, the risks are more balanced. So, of course, if we look at what's taking place in the US, we might have a pickup in inflation, which might come, sooner and more strongly than expected, which at the end of the day would be very good, because that's what we want. And then you have basically two issues: is how do you deal with potential overshooting? And I guess there are different kinds of overshooting. We clearly agreed in the strategy that we would not go for a voluntary overshooting, but that we would tolerate one if need be. So that is one concern. Another concern is what do you do if, say, inflation goes to 2%, 2.1, and then goes back to 1.5, 1.8, and you get stuck there? Do you want to go for another 5 or 10 years of QE negative rates? And that's also where I guess I would not be very comfortable. Again, because we would have to conduct a proportionality assessment. And I find it very difficult to make that assessment for potentially such a long period of time. So again, we all agree on the fact that we want to support this recovery. We want to be, want to go to 2%. But it's when we look at cases that are maybe a bit more complicated, that we might disagree on how we would deal with them. And it cut both ways. It would be in case of inflation spikes and comes much more strongly and rapidly than expected, also by us. But the other situation could also at some point be relevant, that we get stuck somewhere in between 1 or 2%. And then maybe at some point we have to ask ourselves whether our tools are leading to where we want to go.
Okay, I mean, there's so much to unpack here, but I also want to ask you about an extra statement that has been included in the latest monetary policy statement, and that is the one saying that there is, this may also imply a transitory period in which inflation is moderately above target. Can you define transitory period for us? Like, what would be acceptable for the ECB? Are you talking about 1 or 2 months, or are we talking about 5 to 6 months?
I think it's going to be very dependent on how we assess the situation, whether you have base effects or not. I'm relatively relaxed with having some overshooting for certainly above 2 months for a period that would be longer than that. But it really depends on what your assessment is of whether this inflation, this overshoot might be sustained and leading to something that we might not have under control. And that's where, again, I guess I would err on the side of having a bit more flexibility instead of having a forward, looking statement that would sort of define the conditions under which we hike in a way that would be maybe a bit too strict. I think, given the level of uncertainty we have, again, on both sides of the spectrum, inflation could be much higher, or we could at some point get stuck. It's important to get some level of flexibility. So basically, I would have pleaded for an escape clause. So even the forward guidance we've ultimately, I mean, to which it was agreed. My disagreement is not a fundamental one, but I would much have preferred to have an escape clause so that we would make it very clear that if we would be faced, for instance, with difficult trade-offs, that we would exit sooner.